Our speakers today are two outstanding New York Times journalists, Robert Worth and Roger Cohen. Together, their familiarity with the Middle East is unsurpassed. Robert was the New York Times Beirut bureau chief from 2007 until 2011. Prior to that, he reported from Baghdad, and he is the author of the widely acclaimed A Rage for Order, The Middle East in Turmoil from Tahrir Square to ISIS. Roger is an award-winning journalist and author. He is currently op-ed and foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times. He will be engaging Robert in conversation about his book and the turbulent Middle East.
It's a real personal pleasure for me to be here with Bobby. He's been a fantastic colleague and friend, sometimes in difficult circumstances in Baghdad, in Tehran, at the time of the uprising in 2009 after the election, and equally memorably in Tahrir Square at the time of the Egyptian revolution that unseated, or was it a revolution that unseated Hosni Mubarak? So there Bobby and I were in Tahrir Square. It was a quite magical moment. We were in this apartment belonging to Pierre Soufi overlooking the square, and incredible things were happening before our eyes. Members of the Brotherhood were talking to and embracing newly returned Egyptians, secular Egyptians. Everybody was talking about unity, about the quest for dignity. And people really believed they were building a different future for Egypt in which they would become true citizens. They would have agency. And 5 years later, here we are with Egypt under a strongman again, General al-Sisi. Bobby, as you cast your mind back over this arc of the last 5 years, do you feel you've identified in your mind one particular thing that went wrong? Were we all just seduced by an impossible dream?
It's easy to get very cynical about this region, and I was certainly before 2011, before this started, and I was sort of reluctant when I was hearing about these mostly riots early on in Tunisia in December and early January, thinking that they wouldn't amount to anything. And I think what was really incredible at that moment was the sense, as things really got underway. Well, first of all, Ben Ali being, ousted very quickly, and then the revolts getting underway in Egypt, was a sense that aspirations were themselves having an effect on the ground. That there was all this rhetoric, and you couldn't dismiss the rhetoric anymore because it was spreading so quickly, and people were, seeming to transform their reality in front of your eyes. Even then, there were people saying, no, this is just opening a door to terrorists and Islamists. That's what it is. And of course, those people can look prescient in retrospect. But those are the same people who'd been doing their utmost to make those things come true. Not just then, but for years beforehand. So I think it was one of those incredible moments when everything that you think about the region is sort of momentarily blown up. It was what many people said at the time. It's like falling in love. It's sort of everything falls apart, and you think, maybe I don't know this place. Maybe it's better than I thought. I think we all felt that way.
Yes, there was a poet who said that to you. The revolution was like falling in love.
Yeah.
Suddenly seeing your life in a whole different way.
Exactly, yeah. It was Aswani, the novelist, yeah. And he was preaching out on the square in this wonderful way every day at the time. So I think in a way you sort of had to suspend your disbelief at that time. And I think what's also...
So we weren't wrong to suspend our disbelief?
I don't think so. I think you had to believe that something was possible. And I think it's easy to look back and say, well, the Islamists were just holding their fire and it was all calculated and everybody was pent up and ready to sort of start this process of fragmentation. I don't really think so. I think at that time, they themselves sort of underwent a kind of transformation. They heard this rhetoric of national unity and citizenship, and I think they...
Dignity.
Yeah. I think at least in that moment, they believed it, and they sort of... I remember talking to people and thinking that members of the Brotherhood, and thinking, these guys, something's going on, and they're aware of it too, and they're rethinking stuff. I think, unfortunately, it didn't take that long for people to kind of settle back down into the patterns they'd been in before. And then, of course, they began to talk about an Islamic State and secularists went back to thinking, we've got to stomp on these people again, and all the polarization.
I remember talking to Brotherhood members with you, and they were all saying this is a revolution of the youth of Egypt. It's not about us. We're here to help, but our role is ancillary, it's secondary. And we will, if it comes to an election, when it comes to election, we will not present a candidate in the first election because we don't want to be in the forefront of this. And then, of course, within a year, they went back on that. Do you think that was a fundamental error and that history might have been quite different if they had not reversed their initial position?
I think the problem was that you had an element of the Brotherhood that was more flexible, more liberal, more open. It was, as you say, there was the young people. I mean, some of those people remain some of the people I most admire in Egypt because they'd seen both sides. They had been in the Brotherhood. Many of them had left it or were on the verge of leaving it. They saw it as a force for openness and change. They didn't realize how hidebound that organization was, that it was run by these old men who could not change. And I think once it became clear, the Untitled Chapter and company were not going to relinquish anything, were not going to change the way they saw Egypt, it was hopeless. There was nothing you could do.
There's a passage where you say that Morsi, unbelievably elected with 51.7% of the vote, a score that you never hear in the Middle East. You say he's the first democratically elected president in Egypt in 6,000 years. And then you say, but nobody really knew him because he was thrust forward at the last minute. Clearly he made mistakes, but do you think there's anything he could have done that would have avoided the coup that the United States has never called a coup?
It's funny. I know this sounds odd, but for a time I had daydreams in which I imagined his first speech as president. And I thought, what could he have said? Because that's such a great question. I mean, what could he have said? Was it possible to bridge this gulf?
I mean, the deep state was always working against him, obviously.
Absolutely.
It hadn't been dislodged, and one of the main characters in your book says at one point, what could we do? We didn't control the intelligence services, we didn't control the military, we didn't control the judiciary. Many of the essential levers of power were never in our hands, even if we had the presidency. So where does the blame lie?
Yeah. I think it would have taken a sort of heroic act of openness and flexibility. He would have had to reach out to the liberals, and not just liberals, but the big businessmen, Soares, people like that. He would have had to persuade them that he was going to act as purely as a patriot and not as someone who belonged to the Muslim Brotherhood. And he was incapable of that. And I don't think, unfortunately, anybody in the Brotherhood was capable of doing that. I think if
you
they...
don't think some other personality might have?
I think Rashid Ghanouchi is capable of that kind of thing. I mean, he recognized from the beginning that they had to fundamentally alter who they were. He now talks about that group, the Tunisian Islamist group, as being Muslim Democrats, not even Islamists. The Brotherhood was totally incapable of that. So I just think, given what the Brotherhood was, as you say, they were heading for a collision with the military. There were people who, from pretty early on in 2011, who told me that, who said, there's two forces here. It's the Brotherhood and the military. They're going to clash, and the military is going to win.
Should the United States have done more, particularly in Egypt, 25% of the Arab world, the pivotal nation? If there could have been a success story in Egypt, it might have changed so many things.
Yeah. I don't really see how it was possible. I just feel like there were too many structural challenges there. I mean, the challenge for a while, as you remember, for the United States was really just to keep up what was happening. It was changing so fast. They sent Frank Wisner, and then by the time he got there, pretty much, his brief had been overtaken. The notion of creating a structured and gradual transition from Mubarak to something else, that blew up. Frank Wisner was a smart and dedicated guy. I just think it was impossible. I think generally the U.S. was taken so by surprise. We didn't have the flexibility and I don't think we really had room. I think this was such an indigenous movement, and there was so much momentum behind it. I think it was very hard to alter anything.
But here's the greatest wave of liberation movement since 1989, and it happens on President Obama's watch, and at the end of his presidency, it's pretty much all in ashes. Do you think history should judge him harshly for that?
I don't really. I mean, you need someone to put your trust in. There's that kind of wonderful, naive-sounding quote from Obama. I want the kids to win. I want Wael Ghanem to be president. He was the Google guy, the younger. That was just a wildly. I mean, I don't think he meant that in the sense that he was actively backing it. It was just a dream. But these people were almost irrelevant, I think. I mean, they became momentarily famous and they seemed to embody a hope, but they weren't part of the power structure. There was no way they could be. It was such a world apart from what happened in Eastern Europe, where you had, a deep, especially in Poland, a deep and disciplined movement that had thought very seriously about what was going to come next and who was going to be in power. The Egyptians had none of that.
So you're saying there were no building blocks in any of these societies? I mean, if you look at, in your book, you have somebody in Syria saying, talking of the beginning of the uprising against Bashar al-Assad, we want dignity, we want law and civic institutions. And it's pretty much echoed in Yemen. In a sense, somebody says to you, in a sense, that was all the protesters of 2011 wanted, a state where citizenship meant something, where the rule of law was respected. These are clearly things the United States stands for. And here's this word, ethics. Shouldn't the US have gotten behind that more, somehow?
I think it was just so difficult, given the lack of a kind of a social contract in those countries, the fabric you need. And this was at its worst, of course, where you have a sectarian split and foreign countries that are backing, powers there. I mean, obviously Syria is the worst of this, but it happened as well in Libya. I mean, these conflicts got internationalized very quickly. And I mean, Chris Stevens is a good example of someone who, a wonderful
That's
guy.
the U.S. ambassador in Libya
who was killed. Yeah. He was the right person there at the right time. I didn't know him well, but I knew him a little bit. He knew the country really well.
I know him pretty well.
He spoke the language.
Yeah.
He had thought very seriously about how much American presence, was right on the ground. And, he was killed. There's a huge gap, let's say, between expressing aspirations and being able to make them come true. And Yemen is also a good example here. The US, I think, did a very good thing and put a lot of diplomatic weight behind creating the National Dialogue Council, which was a group of people from every different Yemeni faction meeting in this hotel, a great big hotel, the Movenpick Hotel up on a hill in Sana'a. And that was a good idea. It was the right idea. And the trouble was that the US played a leading role in making that happen. But there was a big difference between what was going on in that hotel and the rest of the country. And I think for the US, as for all the other nations involved, I mean, the challenge wasn't just getting those actors on the same page. It was even finding out what they were doing, because there was so much chaos and there were multiple insurgencies going on. And I do think that this is one of the great challenges, I think, for American diplomacy in the coming period, is to resist the urge to stay behind the walls of the fortress, to take risks. People are going to die, but it's worth it.
Your Syria chapters are breathtaking, I think, even in the context of a book overall that I found absolutely riveting. But the way you portray this friendship that cannot withstand the forces around it between a Sunni woman and an Alawite woman, and the way they love each other, but that love cannot survive this whirl of sectarian hatred that breaks out after the initial uprising. Of course, it reminded me very much of Bosnia. Here we are, 5 years on, several 100,000 dead. You just spoke about taking risks. Should the president have taken one or two more in Syria? Is that what you're thinking of?
I do think he could have taken more risks. I mean, it's funny. On the one hand, I suspect that even if he had, the fundamental the strategic situation on the ground would probably be about the same as it is now, just because I think Iran plays such a powerful undermining role there and probably could have countered anything we did. However, I think we could have done more to save lives. I think that makes a big difference there. I think we also possibly might have, if we'd been prescient enough, we might have prevented all these other countries in the region, notably Qatar and Kuwait, from sort of essentially ushering all kinds of jihadis to filter across the border, especially from Turkey, and to make this thing a much more toxic war than it had to be.
Should we have upheld the red line?
I think so, yeah. I just think it, I think despite the fact, yes, we got the chemical weapons agreement done, but I think it undermines the way people view the country in the long term.
Did you think right from the beginning that this would happen in Syria, that a country drawn on a map by British diplomats, a century plus ago, did you think it would disaggregate in the way it has?
No, I certainly from the beginning, I mean, many people said Syria is different, it's going to be worse, it's going to be more toxic. That, yes, but I didn't think that it was going to be this bad. And I'll tell you another thing, I mean, I don't think anybody had any notion that this wave of migrants was going to be unleashed. And you even have to wonder, I mean, Obama, who seems, I think, to have been, he really had made up his mind from the beginning, he didn't want any involvement here. But if you had told him, this is going to happen, this is going to fundamentally challenge the EU, maybe even he would have.
Yeah, well, for a long time it was viewed as a horrible conflict, but essentially parochial, and it wouldn't affect the United States or its allies. Well, it certainly has. Did you think about calling the book A Rage for Dignity?
Well, first of all, I stole the title from Wallace Stevens, so that's,
Yeah.
But it's true that, I mean, I think what you're getting at, order is a funny word there. And in fact, a couple weeks ago.
Well, it's kind of a little depressing. In fact, the end of your book really made me weep, because you describe this young man who'd been very active in the uprising in Egypt, and he ends up in ISIS land. And one of the wonderful things about Bobby as a writer is he really doesn't pass judgment. He just lets you read it and think about it. And he doesn't say anything about the murderous barbarians of ISIS. He doesn't use words like that. He just says, well, that's where this young man ended up in his search for dignity. ISIS land and the adoption of these beliefs was, in the end, as it has been for many estranged Arabs over the last decades, in the end, that was the only refuge where he could find dignity. And it's just a devastating and ominous conclusion.
No, absolutely, and that's what's so. When you read the poetry written and posted online by members of ISIS, I mean, some of it's quite moving, and you feel that. You feel, this was the only place that seemed to offer them some hope. It's strange. I mean, I think one of the things that apocalyptic movements have in common is that they reassure people, oddly enough, because they tell them, in a world that seems completely unmoored from anything that makes sense, they say, okay, history is coming to an end. We can tell you where you fit in and what your role is and how you can help in this move towards this grand and wonderful conclusion. They tell you everything you need to know. And that's what ISIS does.
I think the United States might be more optimistic about the recent history, particularly in Egypt, let's say, if we reassessed the Mubarak years and try to determine what we could have done, a diplomatic mulligan, so to speak, what we could have done, whether it should not have been 100% military aid, maybe there should have been more aid directed toward education, hospital services, et cetera.
It was such a dilemma for the U.S. and all these countries where you had, and Egypt wasn't as bad by any means as Iraq and Syria, where you have a dictatorship that is so good at stamping out dissent. And so, in various ways, the United States was trying to empower independent political figures and things, but the regime was so good at stifling that. I mean, it's one of the paradoxes to me that these regimes could be simultaneously so strong and so weak. I mean, the ultimate is probably Iraq, where they not just stamped out, but preempted opposition. I mean, almost as soon as you had a dissenting thought, they would come and you know, throw you in prison or kill you. Everything was being recorded. Even the people who were most loyal to the regime, you know, knew that when they stepped into their bathrooms at night, they were being recorded. So I think that is part of what prevented genuine, effective opposition from growing in those places. And I think, you know, how then does a country that wants to help, what do you do? And especially when you're being presented with a very effective scarecrow, which is, you know, look, you touch us, and here's this Islamist hobgoblin who wants to kill you and, you know, put bombs on planes bound for the United States. He's going to take over if we fall.
And you have Bashar al-Assad releasing from prison all these Sunni criminals because he wants his prophecy to come true.
And he made it come true to a large extent. You know, I'm not saying the U.S. did the perfect job, but I think it's awfully, awfully hard to, you know, I just want to briefly mention in this context, there was a Syrian intellectual in the 19th century named Abdul Wahban Kawakibi who wrote a book called How to Fight Despotism. Really the same question. And he said there are two fundamental conditions. Number one, you must do it nonviolently. And number two, the replacement must be ready. And the second one is the big challenge. I mean, they were nonviolent, as Roger and I saw, and in a very brave, disciplined way for a long time. But they didn't have a replacement. And I think that's partly because these countries
They didn't even have a leader.
Didn't have a leader. I mean, they didn't even have a Khomeini, at least in Iran, they had a Khomeini.
Since your title talks about the Middle East in turmoil, would you comment on some of the other countries that are being very much affected by all these changes, especially Lebanon?
Lebanon, in a strange way, went through its own cataclysm. You know, not the same kind of cataclysm, but somewhat parallel back in the 70s and 80s. And so they reached this cold peace where you have these different sectarian groups that have agreed to coexist, but at the price of any kind of functionality in the government. So, you know, it's just a horrible mess, and it gets worse all the time. I mean, it was an odd kind of paradox for me that, you know, Lebanon, which people had often looked to as maybe the source of the next big conflagration, usually people are thinking about a war between Hezbollah and Israel. This is, I mean, prior to 2011. And then, of course, the revolts happened, and Lebanon's the country that's spared. You know, nothing really happened there. And again, I think that's because people had seen so much violence and decided that they were going to stick with a very imperfect solution.
Is that a sign that 15 years from now, or 10, or when exhaustion is reached, Syria could reach a similar arrangement?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could. I think it would probably be just kind of a division among enclaves. But the real question there is, I mean, after all, they've got this essentially Sunni part of Syria in the east where ISIS is now. Who's going to run that? I mean, a minimum condition for a Lebanon-like solution would be a quasi-responsible government for that part of Syria. We certainly don't have that now. But I was just going to also say, Algeria, I think, is a somewhat similar situation because they had this awful, awful conflict in the 90s. And even though in the spring of 2011 there was talk, you know, maybe Algeria will blow up, I think it didn't for somewhat similar reasons to Lebanon. People had been through so much, and they kind of preferred to accept the very imperfect solution they had. And as far as the other countries, it is kind of an odd thing to me, but I think it's true. The monarchies have fared much better than the republics. That's partly because many of them are so rich they can spray money at the problem and, you know, hose it down. But it's not just that. I think there's a kind of a legitimacy that they have that the republics lack. And I think it's because if you declare yourself to be a democracy and then essentially you're just a very corrupt dictatorship, it breeds, I think, you know, a readiness to be discontented. Whereas the monarchies have a historical depth, and they've never pretended that they were going to be democratic. They're able, I think, to reassure their citizens in a way that these other countries have not been able to.
Before we adjourn, I have one last question. Do you think the zeal for the Arab Spring has dissipated? Do you think we'll see a revival at all of what happened?
It's true that people are discouraged, and I think much of that hope has collapsed. But if you look in particular places, there are still things to be hopeful about. And I think there still is a generation, many of whose members would like to make a difference. And I'll just point to one that I find particularly inspiring. In Tunisia, there are young people working in journalism and also in election monitoring and other areas, doing NGO work and stuff that has just been really inspiring. And I love mentioning this one group. They're called Intifada, like as in Intifada, but with ink. And they have done some of the most impressive journalism I've seen anywhere in the Arab world. They've done, it's sort of investigative civic journalism, looking in detail, not just at the big issues, they cover those, you know, terrorism, the economy, stuff like that, but even on a local level, they did this wonderful big takeout on garbage collection. And they looked at, it actually mattered because a lot of people in immediate aftermath of the revolution in Tunisia, all of a sudden there was more garbage in the streets. And so people felt, gosh, you know, what does this mean about our revolution that everything looks awful now? So these guys looked in detail, you know, what were the laws about garbage collection and how was it enforced under Ben Ali? What changed and what's going on now? And what needs doing to fix that? You know, what particular laws should be fixed and what, you know, how would you enforce that? They don't have a lot of money and they're just a website. But when they do a story like that, it's picked up and carried in the rest of the Tunisian media. And it really, I mean, that kind of work to me just sort of is the best of what's left of the Arab Spring.
Thank you both so much, really.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.